In the darkness, beneath the Imperial Palace, where ancient machinery hums its eternal song, and a million glowing cables pulse with stolen life, there sits a figure that was once a man. The Emperor of mankind, the Master of humanity, the Omnissiah made flesh. For 10,000 years, he has endured in torment, his broken body sustained by the Golden Throne, his consciousness stretched thin across the galaxy like golden thread pulled to its breaking point. Every day, 1,000 psychers sacrifice themselves to maintain this half-life, their souls burning bright and brief to keep the Astronomicon lit and the webway sealed. It is a terrible burden, an unending vigil, a price paid in blood and suffering that staggers the imagination. But what if it ended? What if tomorrow the Emperor's consciousness finally slipped free from its shattered shell? What if the light that has guided humanity through its darkest age simply went out? This is not a question the Imperium allows its citizens to contemplate. To even consider such heresy invites the attention of the Inquisition, a visit from grey-armored enforcers who will ensure such thoughts never trouble the faithful again. Yet, it is a question that haunts the dreams of those who tend the Golden Throne, who watch the readouts grow more desperate with each passing century, who know that the mechanisms holding reality together are failing, and that no amount of prayer or sacrifice can repair what has been irreparably broken. The death of the Emperor would not be a gentle passing. It would not be the peaceful end of a life well lived, surrounded by those who loved him. No, when the Master of mankind finally releases his grip on existence, it will be a catastrophe of cosmic proportions, a rending of the very fabric that holds the Imperium together. To understand what would happen, we must first understand what the Emperor does, what functions he performs that keep the million worlds of mankind bound together in their desperate struggle against the darkness. Only then can we comprehend the true horror of his absence. The Emperor is not simply a figurehead, not merely a symbol for the faithful to rally around. He is the linchpin of humanity's survival, the keystone without which the entire edifice of the Imperium crumbles into dust. Through his will alone, the Astronomicon burns, that psychic lighthouse that allows navigators to steer their ships through the hellish unreality of the warp. Without it, faster-than-light travel becomes nearly impossible, reducing journeys that once took weeks to desperate blind jumps that might take decades or end in madness and death. His consciousness also holds shut the Webway Gate beneath the Imperial Palace, the portal that Magnus the Red shattered during the Horus Heresy. Behind that gate press the infinite legions of chaos, demons beyond counting who hunger for the chance to pour into real space and transform terror itself into a demon world. Every moment of every day for 10 millennia, the Emperor has expended immeasurable psychic power to keep that gate sealed, to hold back a tide that would drown the birthplace of humanity in warp stuff and horror. These are the facts, cold and unyielding as the adamantium walls of the Imperial Palace. Now let us imagine the unimaginable. Let us walk through the catastrophe that would unfold if the Emperor died tomorrow. In the first instant, there would be no warning. The tech priests and custodians who maintain the Golden Throne would not see the catastrophe coming. One moment, the Emperor's vital signs, such as they are, would read as they have for centuries, weak but stable, a guttering candle that refuses to go out. The next moment, everything would change. The psychic scream that would emanate from the throne room would be heard across the galaxy, a psychic shockwave of unimaginable magnitude. Every psyker, from the mightiest librarian to the lowliest sanctioned weird, would feel it like a blade driven into their minds. Many would die instantly, their brains burned out by the surge of uncontrolled warp energy. Others would collapse, bleeding from their eyes and ears, overwhelmed by the death scream of the greatest psyker to ever exist. On Terra, the effects would be immediate and apocalyptic. The Astronomicon would flare impossibly bright for a single heartbeat, its light blazing so intensely that astropaths across the Imperium would be blinded, their third eyes scorched by psychic fire. And then, in the span of a human breath, it would go out. The greatest psychic beacon in the galaxy, the light that has guided humanity's ships for 10,000 years, would simply cease to exist. In the chamber of the Astronomicon, deep within the hollow mountain, 10,000 souls bound in psychic chorus would die as one, their carefully orchestrated sacrifice rendered meaningless in an instant. The machinery would continue to hum, the focusing arrays would continue to channel power, but there would be nothing to focus, no consciousness to direct the energies that have held the Imperium together. But this is only the beginning of Terra's torment. Far more terrible would be the failure of the Golden Throne's primary function, the one that has consumed so much of the Emperor's power that even maintaining the Astronomicon has become a secondary concern. The Webway portal, that gateway to the labyrinth dimension that the Emperor had hoped would free humanity from the perils of warp travel, has been held shut by his will alone. The moment that will fails, the gate would begin to open. It would not happen instantly, perhaps giving the custodians minutes, maybe even an hour before the wards finally shattered. But it would be inevitable, as certain as the sunrise, that Terra's defenders would never see again. The Adeptus Custodes, those golden armored guardians who have stood vigil over the Emperor for 10,000 years, would know immediately what was happening. These are not mere space marines, not simple warriors sworn to serve. These are the Emperor's companions, crafted by his own hand from his own genetic template. The bond between the Emperor and his custodians runs deeper than loyalty, deeper than duty. When he dies, they would feel it in their very souls, a tearing sensation as if part of their own being had been ripped away. Captain General of the Adeptus Custodes would have only moments to issue orders before the chaos began. Every custodian on Terra would be summoned to the Webway Gate, 10,000 of the Imperium's finest warriors assembling for what they know will be their final battle. Accompanying them would be the Silent Sisters, the Sisters of Silence, those blank-souled warrior women whose very presence dulls the warp. In the war within the Webway, during the Horus Heresy, it was the combined might of the Custodes and the Sisters that held back the demon legions for 5 long years. Now they would be called upon to do so again, but this time without the Emperor to channel his power through the Golden Throne, without his consciousness to bolster the wards and drive back the worst of the warp's horrors. They would be fighting a purely defensive battle, buying time for evacuations that could never be completed, for plans that could never come to fruition. When the gate finally burst open, it would not be a gradual thing. The Webway portal would explode outward in a gout of warp energy that would vaporize everything within a kilometer. Demons would pour through in numbers that stagger comprehension. This is not a mere demonic incursion, not a localized breach that can be contained and purged. This is a permanent gateway to the warp itself, opened on humanity's throne world, in the very heart of the Imperium. Bloodletters of Khorne would scramble over one another in their eagerness to spill blood on sacred terror. Plague-bearers would shuffle forward in diseased masses, bringing Nurgle's gifts to the homeworld of humanity. Demonettes would dance through the corridors of the Imperial Palace, singing songs that drive mortals mad with forbidden desires. And the Lords of Change would circle overhead, cackling at the great joke of it all, at the irony that the Emperor's greatest ambition has become the instrument of humanity's doom. The fighting in the Imperial Palace would be beyond anything the Imperium has seen since the Siege of Terra 10 millennia ago. The custodians would form their shield wall at the Webway Gate, their guardian spears flashing in the unholy light that spills from the breach. They would kill demons by the hundreds, by the thousands, their every movement a masterpiece of lethal perfection honed over 10,000 years of constant readiness. the Sisters of Silence would stand among them, their very presence causing lesser demons to flicker and fade, their bolters and executioner great blades reaping a terrible toll. But it would not be enough. It could never be enough. For you see, the demons would not just be pouring through the webway gate. With the Emperor dead and his psychic presence no longer shielding Terra, the entire planet would become vulnerable to warp incursions. Every place where the veil between reality and the warp is thin, every site of ancient massacre or forbidden ritual, every nightmare given substance by 10,000 years of suffering and war, these would become potential entry points for the forces of chaos. The Imperium has spent millennia carefully mapping and warding such sites across Terra, but those wards were always meant to be reinforced by the Emperor's will. Without him, they would begin to fail one by one. Warp rifts would tear open across the homeworld of mankind. In the underhives, where billions toil in darkness and despair, gates to the warp would manifest as prayers for salvation. Instead, summon demons of every description. The great cathedral of the Imperial Creed, that monument to 10,000 years of faith, would find its foundations warping as the belief of trillions creates a resonance in the warp that draws the attention of entities beyond mortal comprehension. Even the Eternity Gate, that great portal that once witnessed Sanguinius making his final stand against the traitor Horus, might crack and splinter as warp energy seeks out places of great significance. The defenders of Terra would fight valiantly. The Imperial Guard regiments stationed on the throne world would sell their lives dearly, ordinary men and women standing against horrors from beyond reality. The remaining Space Marine chapters would deploy their forces, Adeptus Astartes, in power armor, forming firing lines, and counter-attacking into the demon hordes. The Adepta Sororitas, those warrior women of the ecclesiarchy, would march into battle singing hymns to the dead emperor, their faith unshaken even as everything they believed in crumbles around them. But they would be fighting a losing battle against an enemy that cannot truly be killed, only banished back to the warp from whence they came. And here is the terrible truth that would dawn on Terra's defenders in those first desperate hours. Without the Emperor's psychic might to reinforce the banishments, without his will to weaken the connection between demons and their gods, the entities of the warp would return almost instantly after being destroyed. Kill a bloodthirster, and it might reform in minutes rather than months or years. Banish a demon prince, and it could claw its way back into reality before the defenders have time to regroup. The Imperium's forces would be fighting an endless war of attrition that they have no hope of winning. The High Lords of Terra, those 12 individuals who nominally rule the Imperium in the Emperor's name, would find themselves facing a catastrophe that defies any contingency plan they might have prepared. The Master of the Administratum would watch as his carefully organized bureaucracy begins to collapse, unable to issue orders, to a galaxy that can no longer receive them. The Fabricator General of Mars would know that without the Astronomicon, the Forge worlds are isolated, cut off from the trade and resources that keep them functional. The Ecclesiarch, spiritual leader of trillions, would face a crisis of faith unlike anything in the Imperium's history. How do you tell the faithful that the God they have worshipped for 10,000 years is truly, irrevocably dead? Some of the High Lords would try to maintain the fiction, to keep the Emperor's death a secret. They would know that the moment the truth spreads, the Imperium will tear itself apart. But secrets cannot be kept when the Astronomicon has gone dark, when every psyker in the Imperium has felt the Emperor's death scream, when Terra itself burns with demonic invasion. The truth would spread like wildfire through the warp, carried by the very medium that the Imperium depends on for faster-than-light communication. Astropaths across the galaxy, those psychically linked to one another through the warp, would know. And through them, planetary governors would know. And through them, the common citizens would know. The God Emperor is dead. The light has gone out. humanity stands alone in the darkness. But let us expand our view beyond terror, beyond the throne world's immediate catastrophe, to see how the Emperor's death would affect the wider galaxy. The first and most immediate consequence would be the loss of the Astronomicon, and with it, reliable interstellar travel. To truly understand what this means, we must understand how warp travel functions in the Imperium. The warp is not a peaceful dimension. It is a roiling sea of psychic energy and emotional residue, a place where the boundaries of time and space blur and break. Ships that enter the warp must surround themselves with Geller fields, bubbles of reality that keep the horrors of the Imperium at bay. But even with this protection, navigation through the warp is incredibly dangerous without some fixed reference point. That reference point has been the Astronomicon. Navigators, those three-eyed mutants whose genetic quirk allows them to perceive the warp without going mad, use the Astronomicon as a lighthouse. They steer their ships toward it, around it, using it to plot courses through the ever-shifting currents of the Imperium. A skilled navigator can guide a ship across thousands of light years in a matter of weeks, hopping from one stable current to another, always keeping the light of the Astronomicon in sight. Without it, warp travel becomes exponentially more dangerous. Navigators would be forced to make short, cautious jumps, never sure if they are moving in the right direction, if the warp currents will suddenly shift and carry them decades off course, or if they will inadvertently steer their ship into a warp storm and doom everyone aboard. The effects on the Imperium would be staggering. Trade between worlds would grind to a near halt. The carefully balanced system of tithes that sustains imperial armies and feeds overpopulated hive worlds would collapse. Forge worlds that depend on raw materials from mining worlds would find their supplies cut off. Agricultural worlds that export food to sustain trillions would see their shipments lost in the warp or delayed for years. The interconnected web of commerce that binds the Imperium together, tenuous and fragile even in the best of times, would simply cease to function. Military coordination would become impossible. The Imperium has always been a reactive empire, responding to threats after they emerge because communication is too slow for anything else. But even that reactive posture requires some ability to move forces from one crisis point to another. Without the Astronomicon, that ability vanishes. A Space Marine chapter, receiving a distress call from a world under siege, would face a terrible choice: attempt the dangerous warp jump and risk being lost forever, or stay where they are and allow that world to fall. More often than not, they would choose to jump anyway, because that is what Space Marines do. They are the Emperor's angels of death, and they do not shrink from danger. But many of them would never reach their destinations. Ships would be lost in the warp, emerging decades or centuries later in entirely wrong regions of space, or not emerging at all, their crews reduced to madness and mutation as the Geller fields fail and the warp seeps in. Now, let us consider what happens in the days and weeks following the Emperor's death, as the full scope of the catastrophe becomes clear. On Terra, assuming that the planet has not been completely overrun by demons, which is by no means certain, the surviving leadership would be attempting to form some kind of response. The question of succession would immediately rear its ugly head. Who leads the Imperium now? The High Lords of Terra have ruled in the Emperor's name for 10,000 years, but they have never ruled in their own right. Their authority derives entirely from the Emperor's mandate. With him dead, that authority becomes questionable. Some would argue that Roboute Guilliman, the returned Primarch, who currently serves as Lord Commander of the Imperium, should take full control. He is a gene-son of the Emperor, one of the demigod warriors who led the Great Crusade. He has already proven himself as an administrator and military commander. But Guilliman's authority has always been complicated. Many in the Imperium view him with suspicion, even fear. To them, he represents a return to the era of the Primarchs, a time when transhuman demigods held the fate of worlds in their hands. The Codex Astartes that Guilliman himself wrote was designed specifically to prevent any one individual from wielding such power again. Would the Imperium accept his rule, or would factions rise up in opposition? The ecclesiarchy would face its own crisis. For 10,000 years, the Imperials' cult has taught that the Emperor is a god, that he watches over his faithful from the Golden Throne, that he is immortal and eternal. Now, he is dead, irrefutably, undeniably dead. The psychic shockwave of his passing has been felt by every soul with even a hint of psychic sensitivity. The faithful cannot be deceived about this. How does the ecclesiarchy reconcile the death of their god? Some would cling to prophecies of resurrection, insisting that the emperor's death is merely a transition, that he will be reborn stronger than before. Others would fall into despair, their faith shattered by the reality that their god was mortal after all. And some would radicalize, interpreting the emperor's death as a test of faith, a call to arms that demands holy war against any who question the rightness of the imperial creed. The theological schisms alone could tear the Imperium apart. We have seen this before, during the age of apostasy in the 36th millennium, when the ecclesiarchy attempted to transform the Imperium into a theocracy and sparked civil wars that lasted for generations. That crisis was eventually resolved, but it left scars that have never fully healed. Now, with the emperor dead and the Astronomicon gone, there would be no central authority capable of imposing order. Different interpretations of what the emperor's death means, different visions of how the Imperium should respond, would lead to conflicts that could escalate into full-scale warfare. Meanwhile, on tens of thousands of worlds across the Imperium, local authorities would be making their own decisions about how to respond. Planetary governors who have always chafed at imperial authority would see an opportunity. Without the Astronomicon to guide imperial fleets, without the ability for the administratum to send armies to enforce compliance, many worlds would simply declare independence. This would not necessarily be an act of chaos corruption or Xenos collaboration. Many governors would genuinely believe that they are making the best choice for their people, that in the absence of a functioning Imperium, local autonomy is the only way to survive. Some worlds would try to form regional alliances, pocket empires spanning a few dozen star systems that can still communicate through short, dangerous warp jumps. These new confederations would establish their own trade networks, their own defense pacts, their own systems of governance. In some cases, these alliances might actually function better than the Imperium ever did, freed from the crushing bureaucracy and endless tithes that have always been the price of imperial membership. But these pocket empires would also be vulnerable, lacking the resources and military might that came from being part of a galaxy-spanning civilization. They would be easy prey for the threats that would emerge in the power vacuum left by the Imperium's collapse. The Space Marine chapters would face their own difficult choices. Each chapter is a self-contained military force, capable of operating independently for extended periods. They have their own fleets, their own recruiting worlds, their own supply chains. In theory, they could continue to function even after the Imperium's collapse, but the Space Marines were created to serve the Emperor, to be his angels of death. What does it mean to be a Space Marine when the Emperor is dead? Different chapters would answer this question differently, based on their cultures, their doctrines, their interpretations of their duty. Some chapters would double down on their commitment to protecting humanity, viewing the Emperor's death not as a release from service, but as a call to greater sacrifice. The Ultramarines, with their devotion to duty and their respect for Guilliman's Codex Astartes, would likely fall into this category. They would continue to defend imperial worlds, even as the Imperium itself disintegrates around them, because that is what they were created to do. The Blood Angels, haunted by the death of their Primarch Sanguinius and their constant battle against the Black Rage, might see the Emperor's death as a final confirmation that the universe is one of endless suffering, but they would continue to fight regardless, finding in battle the only meaning that remains to them. Other chapters would take a darker turn. The Black Templars, those zealous crusaders who have always revered the Emperor as a god, might interpret his death as proof that humanity is being punished for its sins. They could launch great crusades not to defend the Imperium, but to purge it, rooting out any hint of heresy or deviation from what they see as the Emperor's true will. The Dark Angels, already obsessed with hunting down the fallen members of their own legion, might become even more paranoid and insular, trusting no one, viewing the Emperor's death as part of some grand conspiracy that they must uncover. And some chapters would simply abandon the Imperium altogether. The Space Wolves, with their fierce independence and their loyalty to their own culture above all else, might retreat to Fenris and focus solely on defending their homeworld and its surrounding systems. The Salamanders, who have always maintained closer ties to baseline humanity than most chapters, might scatter, with individual companies choosing to protect specific worlds that they have come to care about. The possibilities are endless, and with each chapter making its own decisions, the unity that has defined the Adeptus Astartes for 10,000 years would fragment. Now we must turn our attention to humanity's enemies, to the forces that have always sought the Imperium's destruction, and who would see the Emperor's death as an opportunity. The Chaos Gods would be the most immediate beneficiaries. The Emperor has been the greatest obstacle to Chaos's dominion over the galaxy for tens of thousands of years. His psychic might has held back the powers of the warp. His very existence as the anathema has weakened their grip on reality. With him gone, that opposition vanishes. The Chaos Gods would swell with power, fed by the despair and violence that would sweep across the galaxy in the Emperor's wake. The Eye of Terror, that great wound in reality where the warp and real space overlap, would expand. Worlds on its borders that have held out for millennia would find themselves overwhelmed as demon armies pour forth in unprecedented numbers. The Great Rift that tore the galaxy in half during the 42nd millennium would widen further, potentially splitting into multiple smaller rifts that would effectively partition the galaxy into isolated regions cut off from one another. New warp storms would erupt across the galaxy, appearing seemingly at random, but actually drawn to places of great suffering or strong emotion. Hive worlds whose populations descend into anarchy would find themselves consumed by storms that transform them into demon worlds. Battle zones where the fighting is most intense would become sites of massive warp breaches as Khorne is drawn to the bloodshed. The Chaos Space Marines, those traitor legions who turned against the Emperor during the Horus Heresy, would launch raids and invasions on a scale not seen since the Scouring. The Black Legion under Abaddon the Despoiler would emerge from the Eye of Terror with their full might, no longer needing to carefully plan their Black Crusades, but instead attacking wherever they please, knowing that the Imperium can no longer mount an effective defense. The Death Guard would spread Nurgle's plagues across entire sectors, reveling in the despair and decay that follows the Emperor's death. The Thousand Sons would seek forbidden knowledge among the ruins of the Imperium, plundering the great libraries and data vaults before they are lost forever. And the World Eaters would simply kill, drowning world after world in blood and skulls for Khorne. But chaos would not be the only threat. The Xenos races of the galaxy, each with their own agendas and their own reasons to oppose humanity, would also see the Emperor's death as an opportunity. The Orcs, those green-skinned warriors who live only for war, would sense that the galaxy has become a more violent place and would respond with a great surge of aggression. Warg after warg would erupt across every region of space, as Orc war bosses lead their hordes against any target they can reach. Without the Imperium's coordinated military response, many worlds would simply be overrun, their populations slaughtered or enslaved by the Green Tide. The Tyranids, those alien devourers from beyond the galaxy, would accelerate their consumption. The Hive fleets have always been drawn to concentrations of biomass and psychic activity. The Emperor's death would not deter them, but it would remove one of the few forces capable of mounting an effective galaxy-wide defense. individual worlds and pocket empires would fight valiantly, but without coordination. Without the ability to redirect forces to threatened sectors, the Tyranids would advance unchecked. World after world would be stripped of all life, reduced to barren rocks as the hive mind consumes everything in its path. The Necrons, those ancient mechanical beings who once ruled the galaxy millions of years ago, would see the Imperium's collapse as a chance to reclaim what they believe is rightfully theirs. Tomb worlds across the galaxy would awaken, their dynasties emerging to find the young races divided and weakened. Some Necron overlords would launch campaigns of conquest, seeking to restore the empire they lost eons ago. Others would pursue their own esoteric goals, unconcerned with the struggles of organic life, but willing to destroy any who interfere with their plans. Even the Toe Empire, that young and idealistic coalition that preaches the philosophy of the greater good, would expand into the power vacuum. They would present themselves as a viable alternative to the Imperium, offering worlds protection and prosperity in exchange for joining the Toe sphere of influence. And without the Imperium's xenophobic doctrine to label them as heretics for considering such an offer, many human worlds might accept. This would not necessarily be a terrible fate for those worlds, as the Toe generally treat their subject species well, but it would mark the end of human dominance over that region of space. Perhaps most tragically, the Eldari, those ancient elder race who have survived for millions of years, despite their empire's fall, would view the Emperor's death with mixed emotions. The Eldari have never forgotten that the Emperor made a bargain at the world of Molech, that he drew upon the warp in ways that made him powerful, but also made him vulnerable. Some among the Eldari, particularly the Harlequins who served the Laughing God, might have foreseen this moment. They might have tried to warn the Imperium, but their warnings would have been ignored, dismissed as Xenos trickery. Now, with the Emperor dead and humanity tearing itself apart, the Eldari would focus on their own survival, on gathering the Infinity Circuits and protecting the craft worlds, knowing that they can do nothing to save humanity from itself. In the months and years following the Emperor's death, as the immediate chaos subsides into a new, terrible status quo, certain theories about what might happen next would begin to circulate. These theories have existed in various forms throughout imperial history, often condemned as heresy, but never entirely suppressed. With the Emperor dead, these once forbidden speculations would gain new urgency and attention. The first and most widespread theory would be that of the Star Child. According to this belief, which has roots in the ancient legends of the Emperor's origins, when the Emperor's physical body dies, his soul would be freed to reincarnate. The story goes that when the Emperor created the Primarchs, he cast aside his compassion and other human emotions to make himself ruthless enough to do what needed to be done. These emotions became a separate entity in the warp, the Star Child, waiting to be reunited with the Emperor's essence. When the Emperor dies, this theory suggests the Star Child would be empowered by the psychic energy released, potentially becoming a new god in the warp, one who could fight chaos on equal terms. There are several problems with this theory, and anyone with knowledge of how the warp actually functions would recognize them immediately. First, for a warp entity to gain power, it needs worship, belief, emotional energy directed toward it. The Star Child, if it exists at all, has been at best a fringe cult among the faithful. Without widespread belief to sustain it, the Star Child would be a minor warp entity at most, incapable of matching the Chaos Gods who have been fed by the emotions of countless sentient beings for millions of years. Second, the theory assumes that the Emperor's soul remains coherent after death, that it can somehow reform and retain its identity. But warp entities are not individuals in the way material beings are. They are concentrations of emotion and belief, constantly shifting and reforming. The Emperor's soul, upon entering the warp without a body to anchor it, would likely dissipate or be consumed by the Chaos Gods who have sought his destruction for so long. A related theory, once championed by a secret society known as the Illuminati, suggests that the Sensei, the Emperor's immortal children scattered across the galaxy, could be gathered and sacrificed to create a new god entity incorporating the Emperor's essence. According to this theory, the Sensei were created when the Emperor, in his long life before ascending to the Golden Throne, fathered children who inherited his perpetual nature. These Sensei would be immortal, but lack their father's psychic power. If they could be found and brought together at the moment of the Emperor's death, their combined souls could merge with his to create a new entity powerful enough to lead humanity forward. This theory has always been problematic, not least because the existence of the Sensei is disputed, with many questioning whether they are real or merely legend. And even if they exist, finding them across a million worlds and convincing them to sacrifice themselves would be a task of staggering difficulty, possibly impossible, in the chaos following the Emperor's death. A darker theory, whispered in the hidden chambers of radical inquisitors, suggests that the Emperor's death would not lead to rebirth, but to ascension as a new chaos god. The Emperor has been worshipped as a god by trillions upon trillions of humans for 10,000 years. That worship, that psychic energy and emotional devotion has been accumulating in the warp. Some believe that when the Emperor dies, this accumulated worship would combine with his psychic essence to create a fifth chaos god, one aligned with order and humanity but still fundamentally a creature of the warp, subject to its laws and its hungers. This entity might protect humanity, but it might also demand the same sort of worship and sacrifice that the chaos gods demand of their followers. Humanity would trade the tyranny of the Imperium for the tyranny of a warp god who wears the Emperor's face. There is precedent for this. The Eldari's fall birthed Slayer-Nesh, a new chaos god formed from the collective depravity and excess of an entire civilization. If the worship of the Emperor has been building in the warp for 10 millennia, it is not inconceivable that his death could trigger a similar apotheosis. But would this new god be the Emperor as he was, or would it be something else, shaped by the expectations and fears of those who worshipped him? The imperial cult has spent 10,000 years creating an image of the Emperor that may bear little resemblance to who he actually was. A god formed from that worship might be a parody of the Emperor, a twisted reflection of imperial faith rather than a continuation of his will. What is certain is that none of these theories would provide immediate salvation. Even in the best-case scenario where the Emperor is somehow reborn or reconstituted, it would take time. Time for the new entity to gather power, time for word to spread, time for humanity to rally around this new hope. And in that time, the Imperium would continue to fragment, worlds would continue to fall, and humanity would continue to die. The long-term consequences of the Emperor's death would fundamentally reshape the galaxy. The Imperium of man, as a unified entity, would cease to exist. In its place would arise hundreds or thousands of smaller human civilizations, each adapting to its circumstances in its own way. Some would thrive, building new societies free from the oppressive bureaucracy and religious fanaticism that characterized the Imperium at its worst. These worlds might rediscover lost technologies, might forge alliances with Xenos races on terms of mutual respect rather than subjugation or extermination. They might create something genuinely new, something better than what the Imperium ever offered. But most would not thrive. Most would struggle, would fight desperate battles for survival against enemies they cannot hope to defeat. Without the protection of the Imperial military, without the resources that came from being part of a galaxy-spanning civilization, most worlds would be vulnerable. They would fall to chaos corruption, to orc invasions, to tyrannid consumption, to any of 100 threats that the Imperium, for all its flaws, had kept at bay. The galaxy would become even more dangerous than it already was, a place where human civilization is reduced to isolated pockets of light in an ever-expanding darkness. The loss of knowledge would be catastrophic. The Imperium has never been good at preserving its past. Too much has been lost over the millennia. Too many standard template constructs destroyed. Too many libraries burned by zealous inquisitors rooting out heresy. But at least the Imperium maintained some continuity, some institutions dedicated to preserving what knowledge remained. The Adeptus Mechanicus, for all their superstition and religious dogma, have kept the forges running, have maintained the technologies that allow humans to travel between the stars and wage war on a galactic scale. With the Imperium fragmented, many of these institutions would collapse. Forge worlds cut off from their supply chains would go dark. Tech priests who can no longer communicate with Mars would be left to interpret the machine spirits on their own, potentially leading to divergent technological traditions or complete technological collapse. Within a few generations, many human worlds would regress. Hive worlds that depend on food imports would descend into cannibalism and eventually extinction. Agricultural worlds that lose access to the machinery needed to work their fields might return to pre-industrial farming techniques, barely able to feed their own populations, let alone export food to others. Forge worlds that run out of raw materials would rust and decay, their great factories falling silent, their secrets lost as the tech priests who understood them die without passing on their knowledge. The galaxy would enter a new dark age, a second age of strife, perhaps even worse than the first, because this time there would be no emperor waiting in the wings to unite humanity and lead it back to the stars. The psychological impact on humanity would be profound. The Imperium has always defined itself by its relationship to the Emperor. He is the center of everything, the figure around which all of human civilization orbits. To be human is to serve the Emperor, to work toward the fulfillment of his vision for humanity. When the Emperor dies, that central organizing principle vanishes. What does it mean to be human in a galaxy where the Emperor is gone? Where do you find purpose, meaning, hope, when the figure who gave your species direction for 10,000 years is no longer there? Some would find new sources of meaning. They would build local communities, would find purpose in protecting their immediate families and neighbors, rather than serving some distant ideal. They would create new philosophies, new ways of understanding humanity's place in the cosmos that do not depend on the Emperor's vision. These would be the survivors, the ones who adapt and persist despite everything that has been lost. But many more would fall into despair. Suicide rates would skyrocket. Entire populations might simply give up, lacking the will to continue in a universe that seems designed to crush any hope of something better. Some would turn to chaos, not out of ambition or desire for power, but simply because damnation seems preferable to meaningless suffering. If the Emperor is dead, if his sacrifice was for nothing, if humanity is doomed regardless of how hard it fights, then why not embrace the powers that at least promise sensation, that offer pleasure or purpose, even if it comes wrapped in corruption? This would be chaos's true victory, not the conquest of worlds or the corruption of armies, but the corruption of the human spirit itself. The Emperor's death would prove what the Chaos Gods have always claimed, that humanity's hope is a lie, that the universe is fundamentally hostile to order and meaning, that the only truth is power and survival at any cost. And as more and more humans accept this dark truth, the Chaos Gods would grow stronger, fed by the very despair that their victory has created. Yet even in the darkest timeline, there would be glimmers of resistance. The Space Marines who remained loyal to the ideals the Emperor represented, if not to the Imperium itself, would continue to fight. Small groups of Inquisitors, Sororitas, and Imperial Guard would wage guerrilla wars against the forces of chaos, knowing that they cannot win, but fighting anyway, because that is what humanity does. Pockets of human civilization that managed to preserve some semblance of order and technology would become beacons for refugees, last bastions where the old ways are remembered and maintained, even as the galaxy descends into madness around them. The Emperor's death would not mean humanity's immediate extinction. Humans are remarkably resilient, capable of surviving and even thriving in conditions that would destroy most species. Scattered across a million worlds, embedded in countless different environments, humanity would persist. But it would be a fundamentally changed species, shaped by the trauma of the Imperium's collapse and the Emperor's death. Future generations might not even remember that there was once a unified human civilization, that their ancestors came from a single world and spread out across the stars in a great crusade to reclaim the galaxy. The Emperor himself might fade into myth, becoming just another god in humanity's pantheon of legends, worshipped or forgotten as local conditions dictate. As we contemplate these possible futures, we must also consider whether the Emperor's death would be entirely negative. The Imperium, for all that it has accomplished, for all the worlds it has protected and the enemies it has defeated, has also been a source of tremendous suffering. It is a civilization built on religious fanaticism, on the sacrifice of billions of souls to keep a rotting corpse alive, on a xenophobic doctrine that permits no tolerance for the alien or the different. It is a dystopia in the truest sense, a place where individual life has no value, where entire populations can be condemned to death if it serves the broader imperial interest, where dissent is heresy and inquiry is blasphemy. If the Emperor's death leads to the Imperium's collapse, it might also lead to something new, something potentially better. Without the imperial cult demanding absolute obedience, without the Inquisition rooting out any hint of deviation from approved thought, human civilization might evolve in unexpected directions. Local cultures might flourish, finding new expressions of what it means to be human. Scientific inquiry might resume, no longer constrained by the tech priest's insistence on ritual and tradition. Cooperation with alien races might become possible, leading to alliances that could prove beneficial for all involved. This is admittedly an optimistic take, one that assumes humanity can learn from its mistakes and build something better from the ruins. History suggests otherwise. The age of strife that preceded the Emperor's rise was not a time of enlightenment and cooperation, but of horror and isolation, of humanity's colonies devolving into barbarism as warp storms cut them off from one another. There is every reason to believe that the Emperor's death would lead to something similar, that without his unifying presence and the institutions he created, humanity would fragment and fall. But perhaps, in a few lucky places, in a few communities that managed to preserve their technology and their culture, something new and worthwhile might emerge. What is certain is that the galaxy would be forever changed. The Emperor's death would mark the end of an era, the close of a chapter in galactic history that has lasted for over 10,000 years. Whatever comes after, whether it is a new dark age or a potential renaissance, would be built on the ruins of what the Emperor created. His legacy, for good or ill, would shape humanity's future, even after his death. The question is whether that legacy would be a foundation to build upon, or a weight that drags humanity down into oblivion. There is one final possibility that we must consider, one that is perhaps the darkest of all. What if the Emperor's death accomplishes nothing? What if, despite everything, despite the collapse of the Imperium and the suffering of trillions, the fundamental situation does not change? The galaxy would still be a hostile place, filled with enemies that seek humanity's destruction. The Chaos Gods would still hunger for souls. The Tyranids would still devour. The Orcs would still wage war. Only now, humanity would face these threats divided and weakened, without the unity and military might that the Imperium provided. In this scenario, the Emperor's death would not be a transformative event, but simply the beginning of the end. Humanity would persist for a time, scattered across isolated worlds and pocket empires. But it would be in a state of slow decline, losing ground generation by generation. Eventually, perhaps in centuries or perhaps in millennia, the last human would die and the galaxy would continue on without us, indifferent to the tragedy of our extinction. The Emperor's sacrifice, his 10,000 years of suffering on the Golden Throne would ultimately have been for nothing, merely delaying the inevitable rather than preventing it. This is the nightmare that haunts those who understand the precariousness of humanity's position. The Imperium is terrible, oppressive, cruel beyond measure, but it is also all that stands between humanity and annihilation. To wish for its end is to wish for humanity's end, because there is no guarantee that anything better would rise from its ashes. The Emperor, for all his flaws and all the suffering his rule has caused, has at least kept humanity alive. Without him, that survival is no longer assured. As we reach the end of this journey through the catastrophe that would follow the Emperor's death, we must acknowledge a simple truth. We cannot know what would actually happen. The Emperor is not going to die tomorrow, despite the alarmist tone of this exploration. Games Workshop, the creators of Warhammer 40,000, are unlikely to advance the setting's timeline in such a dramatic way, at least not anytime soon. The status quo is simply too valuable, too central to the setting's identity. The Emperor will remain on the Golden Throne, will continue to suffer, and the Imperium will continue to teeter on the brink of collapse without actually falling. This is the nature of Warhammer 40,000, a setting frozen in its darkest hour, always 5 minutes to midnight, but never reaching that final moment. But exploring these hypotheticals, considering what might happen if the Emperor died, helps us understand what makes Warhammer 40,000 so compelling. It is a universe of impossible choices, where there are no good options, only varying degrees of terrible ones. The Emperor's continued existence is a horror, a state of perpetual suffering that no being should have to endure. But his death might be an even greater horror, one that would doom the species he has sacrificed everything to protect. This is the fundamental tragedy of Warhammer 40,000, that sometimes survival requires accepting the unacceptable, that sometimes the lesser evil is still very much evil. The Emperor's death would be the ultimate expression of this tragedy. It would force humanity to confront the question of whether survival is worth the cost, whether it is better to live in misery and oppression or to die with some measure of dignity and freedom. Different factions, different individuals would answer this question differently. Some would fight to the last breath to preserve what remains of the Imperium, believing that any life is better than extinction. Others would embrace the collapse, would welcome the end of a civilization they see as irredeemably corrupted. And most would simply try to survive, making whatever choices seem necessary in the moment, without the luxury of contemplating the larger philosophical questions. In the darkness of the far future, where there is only war, the Emperor's death would not bring peace. It would not bring justice or redemption. It would simply bring more war, more suffering, more desperate struggles for survival against impossible odds. But it might also bring something else, something that has been absent from the Imperium for 10,000 years, the possibility of change. Whether that change would be for better or worse, whether it would lead to humanity's salvation or its extinction, no one can say. But it would be change nonetheless, and in a universe as stagnant and ossified as Warhammer 40,000's Imperium, change itself might be worth the risk. The question of what happens when the Emperor dies is ultimately a question about hope. Is there hope for humanity in Warhammer 40,000, or is the species doomed regardless of what it does? The Emperor's existence on the Golden Throne has always been ambiguous on this point. He is a symbol of hope, proof that humanity once had a champion powerful enough to unite the species and drive back its enemies. But he is also a symbol of despair, evidence that even the greatest of beings can be broken, that no amount of power or planning can overcome the fundamental hostility of the universe. His death would resolve this ambiguity one way or another, would force humanity to confront the truth about its chances for survival. Perhaps that is why the Emperor cannot be allowed to die, why the setting must remain frozen with him on the threshold. To answer the question of what happens after his death would be to answer the larger question about humanity's fate, and that answer might be one that readers are not ready to hear. So the Emperor suffers, and the Imperium endures, and we continue to explore this dark universe, always wondering what lies beyond the next corner, what horrors await in the shadows, and whether there is any hope at all in the grim darkness of the far future. As you contemplate these possibilities, as you imagine the catastrophe that would unfold if the Emperor died tomorrow, remember that Warhammer 40,000 is ultimately about struggle. It is about ordinary people facing extraordinary horrors and finding the courage to fight despite knowing that they cannot win. The Emperor's death would not end that struggle. If anything, it would intensify it, would force humanity to dig even deeper, to find reserves of strength and determination that even they did not know they possessed. Whether that would be enough to save the species, no one can say. But it would be a story worth telling, a saga of survival against impossible odds that captures everything that makes Warhammer 40,000 so compelling. In the end, the Emperor's death would not be an ending at all. It would be a beginning, the start of a new chapter in humanity's long and bloody history. What that chapter would contain, what horrors and triumphs would fill its pages, is left to the imagination. And perhaps that is for the best, because the reality might be more terrible than anything we could imagine, or it might be something we could never have anticipated, something that defies our expectations and challenges our assumptions about what the Warhammer 40,000 universe is capable of showing us. For now, the Emperor endures. He suffers on the Golden Throne, his consciousness stretched thin, his power waning with each passing century, but still he holds on. Still he keeps the Astronomicon lit and the webway sealed. Still he protects humanity, not because he must, but because he chooses to. Because giving up would mean condemning the species he has dedicated his existence to saving. And we, as observers of this universe, can only watch and wonder how much longer he can maintain this vigil, and what will happen when finally, inevitably, that vigil ends. If you found this exploration into the darkest possibilities of the Warhammer 40,000 universe compelling, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. In this space, we delve deep into the lore of the 41st millennium, examining the histories, the heroes, the horrors that make this setting so endlessly fascinating. The Emperor may sit silent on his throne, but there are 10,000 years of stories to tell, countless worlds to explore, and infinite possibilities to consider. Join us as we continue to journey through the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war and where every story is a tragedy waiting to unfold. The Emperor protects, they say. But what happens when the Emperor is no longer there to protect? That is the question that haunts the Imperium, the nightmare that keeps the custodians vigilant and the High Lords awake through the long Terran nights. We have explored some possible answers, but the truth is that no one knows for certain. And perhaps that uncertainty, that terrible not knowing, is the most frightening thing of all. Because in the grim darkness of the far future, there is no hope without fear, no salvation without suffering, and no end to the eternal war that defines humanity's existence among the stars.